Jake Mercer, a decorated Marine veteran, faces discrimination when the manager of a high-end restaurant refuses service due to his service dog, Rex. As the tension rises, a group of Navy SEALs and even other restaurant patrons step in to support Jake, challenging the manager's actions. The manager, Vincent Caruso, insists on a fine dining experience where veterans and service animals don't belong. But the crowd, bolstered by veterans, calls out this injustice. This sparks a powerful movement for veteran inclusion, leading to policy changes, public apologies, and a call to treat every guest with dignity. If Jake's story inspired you, please support our channel by liking and subscribing. Join us for more stories about courage, justice, and making the world a better place for everyone, no matter their struggles. Share this video with friends, and let's make sure no one's ever turned away again. Jake Mercer wheeled himself into the restaurant, the air inside thick with the rich aroma of fine dining and the hum of quiet conversations. The moment he crossed the threshold, Vincent Caruso, the manager, noticed him immediately. Caruso's sharp eyes scanned Jake, lingering just a fraction longer than necessary on the wheelchair and the service dog beside him. The manager's face tightened, his professional smile faltering ever so slightly. "Get out of here! I don't serve dogs or broken soldiers," Caruso snapped, his voice slicing through the hum of the restaurant like a blade. The words struck harder than any explosion Jake had ever faced. For a moment, everything in the room stilled. The clink of cutlery, the soft music, even the breath in Jake's chest seemed to freeze. Jake blinked, his calloused fingers tightening around the armrest of his wheelchair. Rex, his loyal golden retriever, nuzzled closer to him, sensing the tension. Jake's body had been through hell, war zones, explosions, and years of rehabilitation, but nothing had prepared him for this kind of cruelty. The shame that flooded his chest was something he couldn't fight off. Then, the scraping of chairs broke the stillness. At the far corner of the room, 4 men rose in unison, each moving with the precision of military training, even in civilian clothes. One stepped forward, unbothered by the tension, his calm voice carrying through the space. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his gaze fixed on Caruso. The manager faltered, but the damage had already been done. Jake Mercer, at 38 years old, had lived through more pain and perseverance than most could comprehend. He was a former U.S. Marine Corps staff sergeant, and his very presence exuded the kind of quiet strength that came from surviving the unimaginable. His pale blue eyes told stories that words couldn't, each glance heavy with memories of a past that could never be erased. Twice, Jake had deployed to Afghanistan. Twice, he had led his tight-knit combat unit through the unforgiving terrain of Helmand Province. On his second tour, everything changed. A routine patrol, an IED hidden beneath the dust of a seemingly safe road, and then the blast that threw him 30 feet into the air. When Jake woke up, he was in a German hospital. Both of his legs were gone. His hearing was damaged. His body was broken. But it was his sense of self that had been the hardest to repair. The long road to recovery wasn't marked by distances, but by each small victory. Getting out of bed, attending therapy, learning to navigate a world that no longer felt like home. And yet, tonight here he was. Tonight wasn't a mission. Tonight wasn't a mission. It wasn't a ceremony. It wasn't a doctor's visit. It was just dinner. Alone in a restaurant he had passed by 100 times but never dared to enter. It was the first night in 2 years that Jake had dressed himself in a collared shirt and khaki pants. He wheeled himself across town alone. Tonight, for the first time, he reserved a table under his own name. And beside him, always, was Rex. Rex wasn't just a dog. He was a lifeline, a golden retriever with steady, knowing eyes. Rex had been trained to detect the early signs of Jake's seizures and flashbacks. The dog pressed his body against Jake's legs when the memories hit, a silent comfort during the worst moments. At night, Rex would wake him from nightmares before they could consume him. In crowded places, Rex would guide his wheelchair, clearing the way, offering protection from the overstimulation of the world. But above all, Rex was constant. In a world that had often turned its back on Jake, Rex never had. As Jake approached the restaurant entrance, he paused for a moment, allowing himself to feel something he hadn't allowed in a long time: pride. Not because he looked like the man he once was, but because he had survived long enough to become the man he was now. Inside Bella Vista, the atmosphere was one of understated elegance. The candles flickered softly in crystal holders. Conversations were murmured, and the waiters moved with quiet grace. It was the kind of place where people came to be seen, and where the very air seemed to whisper exclusivity. Jake wasn't here for the food. He was here to take a step. A small one maybe, but still a step toward reclaiming his life. The manager, Caruso, stood at the helm of this curated world. He was in his mid-40s, wearing a perfectly tailored suit that hid the stress beneath his professional smile. Caruso had spent decades climbing the ranks of high-end hospitality, building Bella Vista into a restaurant of rarefied taste. Tonight, it was under threat. There were rumors of a critic, an influential, anonymous reviewer, dining in the restaurant that week. Caruso didn't know when, where, or who, but he couldn't risk anything going wrong. He couldn't risk a scene. He couldn't risk Bella Vista's reputation being tarnished. And so, when the hostess Sarah greeted Jake and Rex, Caruso's nerves were already frayed. The quiet presence of the former Marine and his dog was a threat to the perfection he had so carefully constructed. Jake didn't notice the manager's anxiety. He didn't notice the disapproving stares from some of the other patrons. What he noticed was the quiet assurance in Rex's steady steps beside him. This wasn't just dinner. It was a reclaiming of his life. And nothing, not the manager's cruel words, not the whispers around him, could take that away. A man in a wheelchair, accompanied by a golden retriever in a service vest, rolled into the restaurant. Caruso, stationed behind the bar, instinctively straightened, his eyes narrowing as he observed the pair. His gaze shifted quickly from the dog's uniform to the worn scars on the man's hands. But Caruso wasn't concerned with sympathy. He wasn't thinking about empathy. For him, it was all about the optics. Meanwhile, in the back corner of the restaurant, 4 well-built men sat around a table. Their silence was almost unsettling, and their posture was stiff, backs against the wall, eyes continuously scanning. They were dressed in simple button-down shirts and slacks, looking like businessmen on a quiet retreat. But beneath the surface, they were much more than that. Navy SEALs off duty, yet always alert. As the door opened, a soft chime echoed through the room. Everyone's heads turned just a fraction, except for Sarah's. At 22 and in her second week of work, she greeted Jake as he maneuvered his wheelchair into the restaurant. Rex walked faithfully by his side, calm and vigilant in his service vest. Sarah, glancing at the reservation screen, noticed Jake's name. "Good evening, Mr. Mercer. Right this way," she said, offering a warm smile. "Your table is ready, and we've made sure there's extra space for your chair." Jake nodded quietly, his gratitude soft but genuine. "Thank you, miss. Much appreciated." However, before they could move further, Caruso emerged from behind the bar. He didn't shout. That wasn't his style. His approach was sharp and precise, the kind of movement that made everything around him feel a little colder. His voice cut through the air like a knife. "Excuse me," but stepping between Sarah and Jake, his eyes flicking from her to the wheelchair. "Is there an issue here?" Sarah blinked, startled. "No, sir. I'm just seating Mr. Mercer at his reserved table." Caruso's eyes locked onto Rex and then flicked to Jake. "I wasn't informed about the animal," he said, his voice cooling with every word. "We have a very strict no pets policy." Jake's grip on the wheelchair tightened, his knuckles white. "He's not a pet. This is Rex. He's my service dog, trained at medical support. I mentioned it when I made the reservation." Caruso forced a tight smile, the kind that dismissed without further discussion. "Yes, I'm sure you believe that, but we cater to a specific clientele. Many of our guests expect a certain level of refinement. Animals, regardless of their purpose, don't fit with that ambiance." Sarah shifted uneasily but remained silent. Jake, however, maintained his composure, speaking evenly. "Sir, I'm a disabled veteran. Rex is certified under the Americans with Disabilities Act. He assists with seizures, mobility, and PTSD regulation. It's against federal law to deny access because of a service animal." Caruso's eyes narrowed, the faintest trace of irritation flickering behind them. "We've had people come in with emotional support dogs before. Therapy pets, comfort animals. I'm not interested in debating classifications. This is a fine dining establishment, not a recovery center." The words hit like a slap. Jake felt the weight of the stairs now turning toward them. Conversation slowed, forks frozen midair. He glanced down at Rex, who had instinctively pressed closer to his side, his presence grounding Jake in the rising tension. Again, Jake said, his voice calm but firm. This is not an emotional support animal. He's a fully trained service dog, recognized by federal law. If there's a question, I'm happy to provide documentation. But Caruso had already begun shaking his head. I'm sorry, Mr. Mercer. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. We reserve the right to refuse service, and this situation simply doesn't align with our standards. What Caruso didn't notice, what he failed to feel, was the shift in the air from the back corner. The four men, all eyes now trained on the exchange, hadn't moved. Their posture was as rigid as ever, but their attention was razor sharp. The temperature in the restaurant seemed to drop. The clinking of silverware stopped. The quiet hum of conversations died. All eyes were on the entrance, and the tension in the room felt almost tangible. Jake remained still, his back straight, his jaw tight. One hand rested on Rex's head, grounding himself. The manager's voice had gone from polite to sharp, edging toward condescension. I already told you, Caruso snapped, motioning toward Rex. This is a dining room, not a kennel. Other customers shouldn't have to eat near animals. A few guests flinched. Others pretended not to hear, their gazes dropping. But Jake's voice remained even, though there was a tremor now betraying his rising frustration. Rex is a service dog. He's medical equipment, not a pet, just like a wheelchair or a prosthetic limb. Denying me service because of him is a violation of federal law. Caruso threw up his hands, clearly frustrated. You people always come in quoting laws like it gives you permission to do whatever you want. His words came out with contempt. You should have told us. Jake's voice was quiet, almost drowned out by the tension in the air. That what, sir? He asked, the words leaving his mouth with an almost imperceptible edge. Caruso's response was louder now, his frustration boiling over. That lifeline, that partner who kept me alive through 2 tours and helps me survive civilian life now. He leaned in, his voice rising, angry at Jake's insistence. I'm not going to let you turn this into a spectacle. You're upsetting my guests. A voice from the back corner interrupted, low but firm. No, you are. 4 chairs scraped across the floor, the sound like a crack in the silence. At table 14, 4 men stood, each rising in unison. Their presence felt more than seen. They were all in civilian clothes, yet their stature, the way they held themselves, made it impossible to mistake their military background. It was a movement that needed no words. The quiet unity of their stance spoke volumes. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Rodriguez stepped forward first, his face impassive, unreadable, yet his posture radiated quiet authority. His team flanked him, silent but alert, like shadows, strong and vigilant. Rodriguez addressed Caruso without raising his voice. We've been watching this unfold, he said calmly, and we're telling you, you're wrong. Caruso's face twisted with incredulity. Excuse me? You're violating the Americans with Disabilities Act, Rodriguez replied simply. Section 2182. You can't deny service to someone with a certified service animal. Caruso's response came swiftly, his tone sharp. I don't need a lecture from someone who wasn't part of the conversation. Actually, you might, said Petty Officer Thompson, stepping up beside Rodriguez. His large frame cast a shadow over the manager. Because you've now humiliated a decorated veteran in public, in direct violation of federal law, with a dozen witnesses and a few recording devices to prove it. Caruso's eyes darted around the room, realizing too late the gravity of his actions. Phones were out. Faces were watching, some sympathetic, others angry, others stunned by the turn of events. The restaurant was no longer a place of dining. It had become a stage, and the tension was palpable. I reserve the right to remove guests who cause disturbances, Caruso insisted, trying to regain some semblance of control. You made the other tables uncomfortable. Rodriguez corrected him, his voice firm but unshaken. No, you made them uncomfortable by treating a fellow Marine like he was less than human. Jake's head snapped up at the word fellow. It was subtle, but it wasn't accidental. The weight of the term settled in his chest like a quiet comfort. Caruso faltered. "This is my restaurant." Rodriguez cut him off, gently but with a finality that couldn't be mistaken. "No, this is America, where laws exist to protect people like Jake Mercer from exactly this kind of treatment." Petty Officer Martinez, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "You're not just dealing with public outrage. You're staring down a lawsuit, one that any civil rights attorney would be happy to take pro bono." Rodriguez stepped closer, his voice dropping to a lower register. It wasn't threatening, just definitive. "Or you can do the right thing right now, seat the man, apologize, and fix this before it becomes something much bigger than your restaurant." A deafening silence followed his words, the choice hanging in the air like an insurmountable wall. The restaurant had stilled completely, the kind of stillness that isn't born of elegance, but of something heavier, something thicker, with unspoken judgment. Then quietly a fork clinked against a plate. A hushed voice near the bar whispered, "Did he really just say that?" Another voice, low but firm, muttered, "That's a service dog. You can't do that." Jake sat still, frozen in place. Confrontation wasn't new to him, but it had always been a solitary thing, at VA lines, during job interviews, and in the stares he received at airports. But tonight was different. He wasn't alone. From a corner booth, an elderly woman slowly stood. Her silver hair gleamed in the dim light, and she clutched a handbag to her chest. Her spine was straight, like a woman from another time, dignified. "My husband served in Vietnam," she said, her voice trembling, but unwavering. "He came home with more scars than medals. Back then, people spat on him, called him names. It took years for this country to honor what he gave." She looked at Jake, her eyes glassy with emotion. "We promised it would be different for your generation," she added softly, but with the kind of weight only years of experience can lend. "You deserve better than this." A murmur of agreement spread through the room. Someone near the center table nodded. A young couple who had been whispering to each other gave Jake a thumbs up. Caruso swallowed hard. His body was rigid, but there were cracks forming. His jaw twitched. His hand pulled at the cuff of his sleeve, as if trying to reset control. "Ma'am," he said, his voice strained but calm, "I understand your perspective, but this isn't about politics. It's about the law." Before he could continue, a voice cut through from a nearby table. All eyes turned to him. He was in his 40s, well-dressed in a tailored suit. He remained seated, angled slightly toward the confrontation. His voice had the certainty of someone accustomed to courtrooms. "I'm a federal civil attorney," he said, setting his wine glass down with a controlled motion. "And what you're doing right now is textbook discrimination under Title III of the ADA." Caruso tried to speak, but the man raised a hand, not impolitely, but with authority. Refusing service based on a disability-accessible service dog isn't just unethical, it's illegal. If you continue this, not only could you face civil litigation, but given how many witnesses you now have, I'd be stunned. The conversation was far from over, but the weight of its consequences had already started to settle, heavy and undeniable. Jake had no intention of turning the night into something that would make national news, but the atmosphere in the restaurant had already shifted. Phones were out, cameras capturing every moment, screens glowing softly like fireflies in a summer storm. Rodriguez, standing silently beside Jake, hadn't spoken in over a minute. He didn't need to, the momentum had already shifted. The room was no longer siding with Caruso. It was with Jake now. Even Sarah, the hostess, had tears in her eyes. Quietly, she laid a napkin on the table Jake had reserved and then stood beside him. "We set this table for you, Mr. Mercer," she said in a soft voice. "And we stand by that." For the first time that night, Jake didn't feel like a burden. He felt seen. Outside, the red and blue lights of the police cars flashed against the cobblestone sidewalk, like lightning caught in a loop. Inside Bella Vista, the tension was palpable, clinging to the air like steam rising from untouched pasta dishes. Every eye in the room was fixed on the door, waiting. It opened with a soft chime, strangely polite for the moment, but it only added to the tension. Sergeant Lana Wong stepped in first, composed and sharp-eyed, her gaze scanning the room. Beside her was Officer Miguel Ramirez, younger but steady, his hand resting near his belt, though not in an aggressive stance. They paused just inside, taking in the scene. Caruso, already on the move, met them halfway across the dining room. He gestured with the flair of a man used to having control over situations. "Officers, thank you for coming," he said, his voice dripping with rehearsed indignation. "I've got a situation here. These individuals," he motioned broadly to Jake and the SEALs, "are refusing to leave after being asked repeatedly. They're disrupting service and intimidating staff. I believe one of them even threatened me." Sergeant Wong didn't write anything down. She simply raised an eyebrow and turned toward Jake, who sat quietly in his chair, calm, still, with Rex, his service dog, loyally by his side. Rodriguez stepped forward then, measured and respectful. "Lieutenant Commander Marcus Rodriguez, United States Navy," he said, his voice steady but edged with restrained frustration. "No threats were made. We stepped in when this man, Staff Sergeant Jake Mercer, was being unlawfully denied service because of his service dog." "Unlawfully?" Ramirez asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Yes, officer," Rodriguez confirmed. "Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, a service animal trained to assist with medical needs, like Rex here, cannot be grounds for refusing service. We reminded the manager of this, but he escalated the situation instead." Sergeant Wong stepped past Caruso and moved toward Jake, her professional demeanor shifting into something more personal. She crouched slightly to meet his eyes. "Mr. Mercer," she said gently, "can you confirm your service dog is certified?" Jake nodded. "Yes, ma'am. He's registered, trained for seizure detection, mobility support, and PTSD regulation. I have his documentation here." He reached calmly into his bag and produced a laminated card and paperwork. Wong didn't even take it, her eyes already on Rex, who was calm, focused, and wearing his clearly labeled vest. Ramirez leaned slightly toward Wong, his voice low. "We've got at least 7 people recording," he whispered. Wong turned back toward Caruso, who had been trying to maintain his composure. "Sir, are you aware of the legal protections provided by federal law for disabled persons with service animals?" Caruso's bravado faltered. "I was under the impression that you could pick and choose the law based on your decor," he replied, his voice strained. Wong cut him off sharply. "This isn't a gray area. You don't need to be under the impression of anything. What you did was discriminatory. Period." A low whistle sounded from near the front of the room. Another voice whispered, "She's not wrong." Wong continued, her tone firm. "And in case you haven't noticed, the entire room is watching. Many are filming, some are streaming this live. This isn't just about tonight anymore. This could go viral by morning." Caruso paled. Rodriguez stepped in again. "No one came here looking for a fight, but if you try to paint a disabled veteran as a threat for standing up for his rights, you better be prepared for the consequences." Wong nodded, folding her arms. "You have 2 choices. Serve your guests with dignity and compliance, or we document this and file it as a formal ADA violation. Trust me, that doesn't end with just fines." There was silence. Even the waiters had stopped moving. The entire restaurant, college students on dates, elderly couples in blazers, waited to see what Caruso would do next. And in that stillness, it was clear that he had already lost. Jake looked around the room, his hands resting quietly on the armrests of his wheelchair. When he spoke, his voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. The room leaned in to hear him. "I didn't come here looking for a scene," he began, his eyes not just on Caruso, but on the faces watching him from every table. "I came here because it's been 2 years since I got blown up by a roadside bomb in Afghanistan." A hush swept through the room like a soft wind through tall grass. "I lost both legs in that blast," Jake continued. "And for a while I thought that was all I lost, but the truth is it took a lot more than just that. It stripped away my confidence, shattered my sense of normalcy, and for a while even took my voice." Jake paused, his gaze lingering on Rex, who sat loyally beside him, his eyes steady and alert. "This is Rex," Jake said softly, reaching down to rest a hand on the dog's head. "He's not a pet. He's not an accessory. He's trained to detect when my brain is about to seize up. He wakes me from nightmares. He guides me through crowds when the noise gets too overwhelming. When I panic, he grounds me. And when I freeze, he pushes me forward." A small sniffle broke the heavy silence from the back of the room. Jake's eyes slowly swept over the crowd. "Tonight's a big deal for me," he continued, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "It's the first time in a long time that I've felt like I could do something normal again. Just eat dinner, like everybody else." He swallowed, his throat tight, but he didn't let his voice crack. "I never asked to be treated special. I just wanted to be treated like a human." That hit hard. The room shifted. A woman at the bar lowered her drink, wiping a tear from her cheek. A man near the window gripped his wife's hand tighter. Even Sarah, the young hostess, had tears in her eyes. Jake glanced at Caruso, then back at the room. "I'm not the only one like me," he said quietly. "There are thousands of veterans who are out there with injuries you can't always see, but if we let one person be pushed aside, it becomes easier to push the next one." He offered a weary smile. "So thank you to those who stood up tonight, not just for me, but for what's right." The applause started slow, unsure, like the first raindrops on a window, but soon it spread. One table, then two, then a dozen. Before long, the entire room was clapping. Vincent Caruso stood motionless, as if coming to terms with the magnitude of his mistake. His once perfect suit now looked stiff, out of place, like armor that no longer fit. His shoulders slumped, the air of authority he had carried just moments before completely gone, stripped away by the weight of truth and Jake's quiet dignity. Caruso stepped forward, hands trembling slightly. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse, rough around the edges. "Staff Sergeant Mercer," he began, his eyes meeting Jake's for the first time without judgment. I was wrong." He looked around the room, swallowing hard. "I let my fear of losing control cloud my judgment. I thought I was protecting the image of this place. But in doing that, I forgot what truly gives a place like this any worth." His voice cracked. "People." The room fell silent. No phones were raised, no whispers, just stillness. "I owe you an apology," Caruso continued. "Not just for tonight, but for what it represents. For every veteran who's ever been made to feel like they don't belong in the country they fought for." Jake gave a slight nod, but remained silent. Rodriguez, who had been standing just behind him, took a step forward. "There's something you can do that'll mean more than just saying sorry," he said, his tone calm. "Implement a training program, not just for your staff, but for every restaurant in your chain. Help your team understand what service dogs do, what veterans face, and how to treat all guests with dignity." Caruso blinked. "A training program?" he asked, confused. Jake spoke again, his voice low but certain. "He's right." He paused before adding, "This was never just about me. It's about making sure the next guy in a wheelchair doesn't have to explain his worth just to order dinner." He took another pause, letting that sink in. "If you're serious, I'll help. I'll talk to your staff. I'll share my story." Caruso nodded slowly, the weight of redemption settling in. "I'd be honored, truly." Rodriguez glanced around the room before adding, "Being veteran-friendly isn't just a label. It's a responsibility, and it starts with people like you owning your mistakes." Caruso extended his hand, not out of obligation, but with something closer to humility. Jake took it, firm and steady, without bitterness. The room remained silent, not out of awkwardness, but out of respect. That night, a line had been drawn, and it was crossed, not in anger, but in healing. 6 months later, Bella Vista looked the same from the outside. The warm lighting, the polished glass, the soft classical music floating through the air. But for those who knew, everything had changed. The restaurant that had once quietly turned away a veteran had now become a national model for veteran inclusion. A small bronze plaque hung near the front entrance, reading, "Veteran Friendly Certified. All are welcome." Inside, every staff member had undergone ADA and veteran awareness training. But more importantly, they had embraced it. They didn't just memorize policies, they internalized the stories behind them. Leading the transformation was the very man who had once been turned away, Jake Mercer. Now a respected public speaker and advocate for veteran reintegration, he had partnered with several restaurant groups to share his story. He spoke at schools, small business conferences, even city council meetings, always with Rex by his side. The dog's vest had become as much a symbol as the medals Jake never wore in public. On weekends, Jake would still visit Bella Vista, not to dine alone, but to meet friends, to see how the place had changed, to witness the impact of the transformation that had begun that night. The people Jake once feared would never notice him were now the ones he stood with. His allies were the men he'd fought beside: Rodriguez, Thompson, Martinez, and Chin, who had all stayed connected with him. What had begun as a simple act of solidarity had blossomed into something far more profound. It was no longer just brotherhood forged on the battlefield. It had grown into something even more important: a brotherhood built in the aftermath, the quiet war for recognition and respect at home. Sometimes they'd meet for coffee, just to talk. Other times they joined Jake at veteran outreach events, showing up for him as a reminder that he wasn't alone. Rodriguez even helped Jake launch a nonprofit dedicated to offering civilian training for businesses wanting to better serve wounded veterans. Their shared experiences formed the backbone of the movement, one that didn't just stay local, but spread across the nation. The footage from that night, recorded by dozens of customers, had gone viral. It was shared across social media, picked up by veteran groups, civil rights advocates, and major news outlets. The moment when the four men rose from their chairs in unison had become an image of silent, yet undeniable power. Jake's words, "I didn't ask to be treated special, I just wanted to be treated human," echoed everywhere. From TV interviews to military family Facebook pages, his speech resonated, urging everyone to rethink the way we treat each other. The ripple effect was immediate. Policy changes followed. Within months, multiple restaurant chains reassessed their inclusion protocols. Legal groups began using the video in its accompanying training materials. Schools incorporated it into ethics classes. But for Jake, it wasn't about viral views or the data. It was about that single night when he reclaimed his seat at the table, not out of pity, but because he had earned his place. It wasn't just about the recognition either. It was about the dog at his side, the warrior standing behind him, and the reminder to the world that some battles aren't fought with weapons, but with courage, law, and the unwavering will to do what's right. In a world where so many of us walk past others without truly seeing them, this story serves as a reminder of something deeply American. Dignity is not a gift, it is something to be defended. Whether on a battlefield or in the quiet corner of a restaurant, respect cannot just be talked about, it must be practiced. Jake Mercer didn't ask for special treatment. He simply wanted to be treated like anyone else. A man with history, with wounds, but also with hope. That simple request to sit down, eat, and be seen became a mirror reflecting the state of our society. And what it reflected was powerful. One act of courage had the power to awaken an entire room. It showed that decency can be contagious. In a country where divisions often seem deeper than ever, maybe the most revolutionary thing we can do is simply pause and look a little closer. Who are we sitting next to? Who is being ignored? Who might be carrying invisible wounds? If you've ever found yourself in a similar situation, whether you've stood up for someone or regretted not doing so, we want to hear your thoughts. Has kindness ever shifted a moment for you? Do you think businesses today are doing enough to include veterans and people with disabilities? Share your story in the comments. We read every one, and your voice could inspire someone else to act. If this story moved you, please consider hitting the like button, subscribing to our channel, and sharing it with someone who might need a reminder of what quiet courage looks like. To our older viewers, especially veterans and families who've lived through these experiences, thank you. Your sacrifices laid the foundation of this nation's character. And to everyone watching, let's continue building a country where no one is ever turned away from the table. Because sometimes the most patriotic thing we can do is simply stand up for someone trying to sit.